At Riverside High School, the morning started like any other. Students filed into Jennifer Parker's classroom, taking their usual seats under the fluorescent lights. The room was arranged in typical fashion, rows of desks facing the whiteboard, with motivational posters adorning the walls. Jennifer, a middle-aged teacher with graying blonde hair and wire-rimmed glasses, stood at the front, preparing for what she believed would be a routine diversity lesson. Aaliyah Thompson sat in the third row, her natural afro framing her face. She was a bright student, consistently earning top grades, though she often felt like an outsider in the predominantly white school. Today, she wore her hair in its natural state, having recently decided to embrace her cultural identity more openly. The trouble began when Jennifer started discussing professional appearance as part of her diversity curriculum. Her voice carried a subtle edge as she scanned the classroom, her gaze repeatedly returning to Aaliyah's hair. In the professional world, Jennifer declared, certain standards must be maintained. We need to consider how we present ourselves. Several students shifted uncomfortably in their seats as Jennifer's focus became increasingly obvious. Aaliyah tried to shrink into her chair, her hands unconsciously moving to touch her hair. The teacher's words grew more pointed, using terms like neat, manageable, and appropriate, while clearly directing her comments toward Aaliyah. The situation escalated when Jennifer walked to her desk drawer and pulled out a pair of scissors. Sometimes, she announced to the class, we need to make adjustments to fit in. Let me show you what I mean. Without warning or permission, she approached Aaliyah's desk. The classroom fell silent. In a moment that would change everything, Jennifer reached out and grabbed a section of Aaliyah's hair. The scissors made a harsh snipping sound as she cut through the carefully maintained curls. Pieces of Aaliyah's hair fell to the floor as gasps echoed through the room. Aaliyah sat frozen, tears welling in her eyes. The sound of nervous laughter from some students broke the spell, and she suddenly stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. Without a word, she ran from the classroom, leaving her belongings behind. The laughter grew louder, mixing with shocked whispers and the sound of phones capturing the moment. Minutes later, in his office, Michael Thompson's phone rang. The secretary's voice trembled as she explained what had happened. Michael's grip on the phone tightened as he listened, his face darkening with each detail. "I'll be there in 5 minutes," he said, his voice carefully controlled but filled with barely contained fury. The incident would soon spread through the school's hallways, shared through text messages and social media posts. Jennifer remained in her classroom, the scissors still in her hand, as the reality of what she had done began to sink in. She had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, and the consequences would reach far beyond this single moment. Michael Thompson's car screeched into his reserved parking spot at Riverside High. His usual composed demeanor had vanished, replaced by a barely contained rage that radiated from his tall frame. As he strode through the school's main entrance, students and teachers alike pressed themselves against the walls, recognizing the dangerous calm in his expression. The front office fell silent as he entered. Sandra, his secretary for the past decade, stood up immediately. "Michael, I've already called the district office and documented the incident. Jennifer is still in her classroom. And Aaliyah?" Her voice cracked. "Aaliyah is in the nurse's office with her friends." Michael raised his hand, stopping Sandra mid-sentence. "Call Jennifer to my office, now." His voice was measured, but carried an undercurrent of fury that made Sandra reach for the phone without hesitation. He entered his office, closing the door with deliberate care, and took several deep breaths while standing behind his desk. Minutes later, Jennifer knocked and entered. She had composed herself, but her hands were visibly shaking. Before she could speak, Michael cut her off. "Sit down." The command left no room for discussion. Jennifer sank into the chair across from his desk, clutching her purse like a shield. "Explain to me," Michael began, his words precise and cutting. "What gave you the right to assault my daughter?" When Jennifer opened her mouth to protest the word assault, he slammed his hand on the desk. Choose your next words very carefully, because right now, I'm not just speaking as a principal. I'm speaking as a father whose child was publicly humiliated and physically violated by someone who should have protected her. Jennifer's prepared defense crumbled. I was trying to help her understand professional standards. The words died in her throat as Michael stood up, towering over her. Professional standards? His voice dripped with contempt. You took scissors to a student's hair without permission. You singled out my daughter because of her natural hair texture. You demonstrated exactly the kind of prejudice that has no place in education or anywhere else in society. The tension in the room was suffocating. Through the office window, they could see students gathering, drawn by the drama unfolding. Michael walked to the window, pulling the blinds shut with a sharp snap. Here's what's going to happen, he continued, turning back to Jennifer. You're suspended, effective immediately, pending a full investigation. The school board will be notified, and you will attend mandatory sensitivity training. If it were solely up to me, you'd be clearing out your desk right now, but there are procedures we must follow. Jennifer's face had gone pale. Michael, please, my career. Your career? He cut her off again. You should have thought about your career before you decided to humiliate a student, before you decided that your prejudices were more important than a young woman's dignity, before you took scissors to my daughter's hair. The meeting ended with Jennifer being escorted from the building by security, while curious students watched through classroom windows. Michael remained in his office, making necessary calls to the district office and documenting everything. Only when he was alone did he allow himself a moment of vulnerability. Looking at a family photo on his desk, showing Aliyah's bright smile from her freshman year, the incident would have repercussions beyond this day, and Michael knew the coming weeks would test him both as an administrator and as a father. But for now, he had one more difficult task ahead: comforting his daughter and helping her navigate the aftermath of this traumatic experience. Jennifer sat in her parked car outside her empty house, gripping the steering wheel until her knuckles turned white. The events of the day played on repeat in her mind: the scissors in her hand, the sound of cutting hair, Aliyah's tears, Michael's fury. Her own reflection in the rearview mirror seemed to mock her, showing a woman she barely recognized. The mandatory sensitivity training would begin tomorrow at the district office. She'd received the email while still sitting in her car in the school parking lot, too ashamed to drive home immediately after being escorted out. The training would last 6 weeks, 3 times a week, led by Dr. Marcus Chen, a specialist in cultural competency and anti-bias education. As she finally entered her house, Jennifer's phone buzzed continuously with notifications. Local news had picked up the story. Her Facebook page filled with angry comments from parents and former students. Someone had recorded the incident on their phone, and the video was spreading rapidly across social media. Jennifer watched it once, seeing herself through others' eyes for the first time. The casual cruelty in her stance, the entitled expression on her face as she approached Aliyah with the scissors. The first day of sensitivity training arrived with brutal swiftness. Jennifer walked into the district office, head down, avoiding eye contact with other teachers who were there for regular professional development. Dr. Chen's classroom was small, with just 5 other participants, all educators who had demonstrated various forms of bias in their classrooms. Today, Dr. Chen announced, we're going to listen to stories from students who have experienced discrimination in educational settings. He played a video interview of a young black woman describing how her teacher had touched her hair without permission, making her feel like a specimen on display. Jennifer's stomach churned as she recognized her own actions in the story. During the group discussion that followed, another teacher shared his experience of realizing his unconscious bias against students with non-English names. Jennifer remained silent, but her mind wandered to all the times she had sighed or rolled her eyes at names she considered difficult to pronounce. The breakthrough, if it could be called that, came during an exercise where they had to write letters to their younger selves about prejudice. Jennifer's pen hovered over the paper as memories flooded back. Her own mother's obsession with proper appearance, the subtle and not-so-subtle racism she'd grown up with in her small town, the ways she'd internalized these messages without questioning them. "Your biases didn't develop overnight," Dr. Chen told the group, "and they won't disappear overnight either. The goal isn't to shame you, but to help you recognize and change harmful patterns of thinking and behavior." That evening, Jennifer found herself looking through her class photos from previous years. She noticed for the first time how she had consistently placed certain students in the back row, how her smile seemed more genuine next to some students than others. The realization made her physically ill. She thought about calling Michael to apologize, but knew it was too soon, and perhaps more about easing her guilt than genuine remorse. Instead, she began researching Black hair care, cultural significance, and the history of discrimination. Each article, each video, each personal story peeled back another layer of her ignorance. The weight of her actions pressed heavily on her chest. She hadn't just cut hair. She had attacked a young woman's identity, dignity, and sense of self-worth. The road to understanding and genuine change would be long, and Jennifer was only beginning to realize just how far she had to go. 3 days after the incident, Aaliyah sat in the Bean Counter, a local cafe near Riverside High, surrounded by her closest friends, Jasmine, Taylor, and Maria. Her hair, now noticeably uneven on one side, was wrapped in a colorful headscarf that Jasmine had given her. The cafe buzzed with afternoon customers, but their corner booth felt like a protective bubble. "I'm not going back to hiding," Aaliyah declared, her hands wrapped around an untouched cup of hot chocolate. The viral video of her humiliation had reached over 100,000 views, making her both a symbol and a target. Her phone continued to light up with messages from strangers, some supportive, others disturbingly hostile. Jasmine, who had been vocal about organizing student protests, pulled out her laptop. "Look at this," she said, turning the screen toward Aaliyah. "There's a group called Crown Coalition that advocates for natural hair protection in schools. They want to interview you for their website." The discovery led them to find more resources. Taylor, whose mother ran a local community center, mentioned a Black Student Alliance that met weekly to discuss cultural identity and empowerment. "They're having a special session about hair discrimination this weekend," she explained. "My mom says you should come." That Saturday, Aaliyah attended her first Alliance meeting. The community center's meeting room was packed with students from various schools, many sharing similar stories of discrimination. A local hairstylist, Ms. Regina, spoke about the historical significance of Black hair and its connection to identity and resistance. "Your hair is your crown," Ms. Regina emphasized, making eye contact with Aaliyah. "When they try to take it from you, they're trying to take your power. But here's the thing, they can't unless you let them." After the meeting, Ms. Regina offered to help style Aaliyah's hair, turning the uneven cut into a fashionable asymmetrical style that made her feel more confident. Back at school, Aaliyah noticed the divide among her classmates. Some avoided eye contact, while others expressed genuine support. During lunch period, she overheard conversations about privilege and discrimination that had never happened before. Her incident had forced uncomfortable but necessary discussions. The idea for a school project came during another cafe meeting with her friends. "We need to do more than just talk about what happened," Aaliyah said, pushing her chair back determinedly. "We need to change things." She began sketching out plans for a cultural awareness initiative that would go beyond the usual diversity assemblies. Maria, who worked on the school newspaper, suggested documenting stories of other students who had faced discrimination. "Not just about hair," she explained, "but all the small ways people get made to feel other. We could create a permanent exhibit." The project gave Aaliyah purpose. Each day she gathered more supporters, Students from different backgrounds began sharing their experiences. The Hispanic student told to speak English. The Muslim girl questioned about her hijab. The Asian student mocked for his lunch choices. Their stories formed a tapestry of shared experiences and resilience. Working on the project helped Aaliyah process her own trauma. Some days were harder than others. Sometimes she'd catch her reflection and feel the ghost of those scissors, hear the echo of laughter, but increasingly, she saw herself as more than a victim. She was becoming an advocate, a leader, someone who could turn pain into purpose. Michael Thompson stood in the doorway of the community center, watching Aaliyah and her friends plan their cultural awareness project. The pride he felt was tempered by lingering anger, but seeing his daughter's strength gave him hope. He stepped into the room, drawing everyone's attention. "I've been thinking about your project," he said, pulling up a chair. "The school board has approved a full week of cultural awareness events, with funding." He placed a folder on the table containing official documentation. "Whatever you need, space, resources, permissions, it's yours." Meanwhile, across town, Jennifer sat in her 8th sensitivity training session, no longer the silent participant she'd been at the start. Dr. Chen had asked each person to share a moment when they'd been made to feel other. Jennifer described growing up poor in an affluent area, wearing secondhand clothes, and being mocked for it. But instead of developing empathy, she admitted, her voice shaking, "I became desperate to fit in. I started judging others the same way I'd been judged. I became what I hated." The revelation hit her hard, bringing unexpected tears. After class, one of her fellow participants, a teacher named Robert, approached her. "I saw the video," he said. "Everyone did. But I also see you doing the work now, really doing it, not just checking boxes." He shared his own story of causing harm through ignorance and his journey to become a better educator. Jennifer spent her evenings researching and reflecting. She created a detailed document of every instance she could remember where she'd shown bias in her classroom. The list was long and uncomfortable. She wrote letters of apology to former students, though she didn't send them yet. Dr. Chen had advised against it, explaining that such gestures could seem self-serving if done too soon. One evening, she drove past the bean counter and saw Aaliyah inside with her friends. Jennifer quickly drove away, but the image stayed with her, Aaliyah laughing, confident, refusing to be diminished. It sparked something in Jennifer, a desire to do more than just feel guilty. She began volunteering at a local youth center, specifically requesting to work behind the scenes where she wouldn't interact with students directly. She organized supplies, cleaned rooms, and helped with administrative tasks. The center's director, Ms. Washington, watched Jennifer's quiet dedication with measured appreciation. "You know," Ms. Washington said one day, "real change isn't just about feeling bad. It's about doing better." She handed Jennifer some flyers about an upcoming youth leadership program. These need to be distributed to local schools, including Riverside. Jennifer hesitated before taking the flyers. "I'm not sure I'm the right person." "You're exactly the right person," Ms. Washington interrupted. "Because you understand the cost of ignorance now. The question is, what are you going to do with that understanding?" The next day, Jennifer requested a meeting with Dr. Chen and the district superintendent. She proposed developing a comprehensive anti-bias training program for teachers, using her own experience as a cautionary tale. The superintendent was skeptical, but Jennifer's sincerity and detailed proposal made an impression. "I'm not asking to be forgiven," Jennifer explained. "I'm asking to be allowed to prevent others from making the same mistakes." She presented research showing how common similar incidents were and the lasting impact they had on students. The path to redemption wasn't straight or simple. For every step forward, there were moments of doubt and resistance. But slowly, Jennifer began to understand that true redemption wasn't about making herself feel better. It was about creating real change. The Riverside High School library had been transformed into event headquarters. Large sheets of paper covered the tables, filled with schedules, speaker lists, and logistics plans. Aaliyah stood at the center of it all, coordinating with different student groups while her friends managed various aspects of the planning. "We've got confirmation from 3 local artists," Maria announced, checking her spreadsheet. "They're willing to showcase work about cultural identity. The gymnasium can be converted into a gallery space." Around her, students from different grades and backgrounds worked together, some who had never spoken to each other before this project. The planning committee had grown beyond Aaliyah's initial friend group. James from the tech club offered to handle audio-visual needs. Sarah, whose parents owned a catering business, coordinated food vendors representing different cultures. Even students who had laughed during the incident were now asking how they could help, though Aaliyah maintained a careful distance. During one planning session, Jennifer appeared at the library entrance, carrying a stack of papers. The room fell silent. Aaliyah's friends moved closer to her protectively, but she raised her hand to stop them. Jennifer spoke from where she stood, maintaining a respectful distance. "I've compiled some resources," she said quietly, placing the papers on a nearby table. "Contact information for local cultural organizations, grant opportunities for diversity initiatives, and some suggestions from the youth center where I've been volunteering. Take what's useful, ignore the rest." She turned to leave but paused. The superintendent approved funding for professional video documentation of the event, if you're interested. After Jennifer left, Aaliyah examined the materials. They were meticulously organized, with sticky notes highlighting key information. Despite her conflicted feelings, Aaliyah recognized the value of the resources. "We can use these," she decided, surprising her friends. Not for her, but for the event. The planning continued with increased momentum. Students created multimedia presentations about their cultural experiences. The drama club prepared skits addressing microaggressions in school settings. The school newspaper team, led by Maria, planned a special edition featuring student stories and interviews with community leaders. During one afternoon session, Michael stopped by to check on the progress. He found Aaliyah discussing stage arrangements with the facilities manager. "The fire marshal approved our layout," she reported professionally. "We'll have space for 500 people in the main assembly, with breakout sessions in surrounding classrooms." The event was growing beyond their initial vision. Local news stations requested coverage. Other schools asked about implementing similar programs. What had started as a response to one incident was becoming a model for cultural awareness in education. Jennifer's continued indirect involvement created tension. Some parents objected to her participation in any form, while others argued for second chances. Aaliyah focused on the practical aspects, using what was useful while maintaining boundaries. When Jennifer submitted a proposal for a teacher training workshop during the event, Aaliyah and the committee reviewed it objectively, eventually approving it with modifications. As the event date approached, final details fell into place. The schedule was set: morning keynote speeches, afternoon workshops, evening performances, and ongoing art exhibitions. Security plans were established, volunteer schedules confirmed, and technical requirements met. The night before the event, Aaliyah stayed late at school, reviewing everything one final time. The empty halls echoed with promise and possibility. Tomorrow would test not just the success of their planning, but the school's readiness for real change. Dawn broke over Riverside High School as Aaliyah arrived at 6 a.m., her heart pounding with a mixture of anxiety and determination. The parking lot was already filling with volunteers, delivery trucks, and early arriving presenters. Security personnel in yellow vests directed traffic, while student volunteers in matching t-shirts unloaded equipment. Inside the gymnasium, the transformation was stunning. Professional lighting rigs illuminated photography exhibits, showing students cultural celebrations, family histories, and personal journeys. The tech team, led by James, ran final sound checks on the main stage while testing the video feeds to overflow rooms. "The registration tables are set up," Jasmine reported, clipboard in hand. "We've got over 400 pre-registered attendees, including representatives from 5 other school districts." She paused, lowering her voice. "Jennifer's workshop is already full, mostly teachers and administrators." Aaliyah nodded, focusing on her checklist. The morning's nervous energy shifted to focused activity as more people arrived. Local news vans parked outside, reporters setting up equipment. Michael worked the front entrance, greeting school board members and community leaders with professional courtesy while keeping a protective eye on the proceedings. At 8:30 a.m., the first session began. Ms. Regina, who had helped Aaliyah style her hair after the incident, took the stage. Her presentation on the historical significance of black hair drew a standing room-only crowd. Phones raised to record as she demonstrated traditional styling techniques, explaining their cultural importance. Jennifer's workshop ran simultaneously in a separate classroom. Through the window, Aaliyah glimpsed her former teacher sharing her story, not as a bid for sympathy, but as a warning about unchecked bias. The room was packed with educators taking notes, some nodding in uncomfortable recognition of their own potential for harmful assumptions. The afternoon brought performances. The drama club's skits about microaggressions prompted both laughter and serious discussions. A student dance group performed traditional dances from various cultures, each introduction providing historical context. In between sessions, attendees explored the art exhibits, their conversations echoing through the halls. Crisis struck during the third session. The main sound system failed during a crucial panel discussion. James and his tech team scrambled to fix it, while Aaliyah kept the audience engaged, demonstrating the quick thinking and leadership skills she'd developed through this process. The catering service, coordinated by Sarah, served dishes from different cultures, each station featuring information about the food's significance. The cafeteria buzzed with conversations as people tried new flavors and shared stories about their own family recipes. By late afternoon, exhaustion began to show on the volunteers' faces, but the energy remained high. Social media was flooded with posts about the event, shared by attendees and picked up by local news stations. The hashtag #MindYourRiverside Cultural Day was trending in their area. The event's climax approached with Aaliyah's scheduled speech. She stood backstage, adjusting her microphone, while Michael watched from the wings. Jennifer sat in the back row, having asked permission to attend this portion. The audience fell silent as Aaliyah took the stage, her confidence evident in every step. Aaliyah stood at the podium, her voice steady as she addressed the packed auditorium. 2 months ago, someone tried to tell me that my identity was wrong, that my hair was unprofessional, that I needed to change to fit in. She touched her now styled hair. The asymmetrical cut transformed into a statement of strength. Today, I'm standing here not as a victim, but as someone who refused to let that moment define me. The audience sat transfixed as she spoke about the broader implications of what had happened. Security guards estimated that over 600 people had crowded into the space, with more watching live streams in overflow rooms. Among them were students from neighboring schools, educators, community leaders, and even representatives from the State Board of Education. After Aaliyah's speech, the planned discussion panel began. Students from various backgrounds shared their experiences with discrimination, but now their stories carried a different weight. They weren't just talking about problems. They were presenting solutions, describing how their communities had overcome prejudice and built bridges of understanding. Jennifer's participation in the panel marked a crucial moment. She didn't attempt to defend her actions or seek forgiveness. Instead, she spoke directly about the insidious nature of ingrained prejudice and the constant work required to combat it. Change isn't about good intentions, she explained. It's about active effort and accepting uncomfortable truths about ourselves. The impact of the event became evident in unexpected ways. During the break, a group of teachers approached Michael with a proposal for regular cultural competency workshops. Students who had previously been silent about their experiences with discrimination now spoke up, knowing they had support. Even the school's policies were being re-examined, with the administration drafting new guidelines about cultural sensitivity and student rights. Local businesses that had sponsored the event began discussing internship programs focused on promoting diversity in the workplace. The superintendent announced plans to implement similar programs across the district, using Riverside's event as a model. News coverage expanded from local stations to regional networks, drawing attention to the broader issues of discrimination in education. The most significant changes were visible in daily interactions. Students who had never spoken to each other were engaging in conversations about their different backgrounds. The cafeteria, once informally segregated by social groups, showed signs of integration. Even small gestures like students correcting others' pronunciations of names indicated a shift in awareness. Michael observed these changes with cautious optimism. In his office after the event, he reviewed feedback forms and emails from attendees. One message from a student particularly stood out. "For the first time, I feel like I can be myself at school without apologizing." Jennifer's transformation, though not complete, showed in her actions rather than her words. She had started mentoring new teachers about cultural sensitivity, sharing her story as a warning rather than seeking redemption. Her workshop materials were being requested by other schools, though she insisted they be presented alongside perspectives from diverse educators. The day concluded with an unexpected scene in the parking lot. Aaliyah found Jennifer packing up her presentation materials. They didn't speak, but Aaliyah handed her a copy of the event program, signed by all the student organizers. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was acknowledgement of change, of effort, of the possibility of growth. 2 weeks after the successful cultural awareness event, the fragile peace at Riverside High was shattered. During lunch period, Aaliyah overheard snickering from a group of students led by Brandon Mitchell, son of a prominent school board member. They had created a mocking social media page titled Riverside's Hair Police, featuring edited photos from the event and cruel commentary. "It was just a haircut," Brandon said loudly as Aaliyah passed their table. "Now we can't even joke about anything without someone calling it discrimination." His friends laughed, some uncomfortably, others with genuine malice. One of them had photoshopped scissors onto pictures from the event, adding captions that minimized the original incident. Word reached Michael's office quickly. He sat at his desk, staring at the printed screenshots while dealing with a flood of angry phone calls from parents on both sides of the issue. Some demanded immediate expulsion for the students involved. Others accused the school of overreacting to harmless jokes. "This is exactly what we were trying to prevent," Michael said during an emergency staff meeting. The teachers sat in tense silence as he laid out the facts. "We have students actively mocking an anti-discrimination event. Worse, they're re-traumatizing the victim of the original incident." Brandon's father, Richard Mitchell, stormed into the school demanding to see Michael. "This is ridiculous," he shouted, waving printed copies of the school's social media policy. "My son has freedom of speech. You can't punish him for posting memes." The confrontation in the main office drew attention. Students gathered in the hallway, phones recording as Richard Mitchell's voice carried through the closed door. "If you take any action against my son, I'll have the board review your position as principal." Aaliyah, who had been working on a follow-up newsletter about the event's impact, felt her confidence wavering. The supportive messages on her phone were now mixed with cruel memes and anonymous messages questioning her motives. Some suggested she had orchestrated the original incident for attention. Jennifer, still working to rebuild her reputation, found herself in an unexpected position. During her cultural sensitivity workshop at another school, students brought up the new controversy. "How do we handle backlash?" they asked. What happens when people don't want to change? The school became divided again, but differently this time. Students who had supported the cultural awareness event organized a social media campaign of their own, sharing positive stories and highlighting the event's impact. However, this led to increasingly heated online exchanges between opposing groups. Michael faced a crucial decision. The school's policies on cyberbullying were clear, but enforcing them against a board member's son could have serious professional consequences. The district office remained notably silent on the issue, leaving him to handle it alone. Aaliyah's friends rallied around her, but she noticed some former supporters keeping their distance, afraid of becoming targets themselves. During a student council meeting, the tension erupted into a shouting match between those who wanted to take action and those who thought everyone was being too sensitive. As photos and videos from the new conflict spread online, the local media returned, sensing a follow-up story to their previous positive coverage. This time, their presence felt invasive, with reporters trying to pit students against each other for more dramatic interviews. The school board meeting was scheduled for 7 p.m., but by 6 the Riverside High auditorium was already packed. Michael sat in his office, reviewing his prepared statement one last time. On his desk lay 2 documents, his letter of resignation and a comprehensive report, documenting every incident of discrimination and subsequent harassment at the school, including Brandon's social media campaign. Aaliyah waited backstage with her friends, clutching a USB drive containing archived screenshots, messages, and videos. She had spent the past week collecting evidence, not just of the recent harassment, but of the positive changes that had occurred since the cultural awareness event. Her hands shook slightly, but her expression remained determined. Jennifer arrived early, choosing a seat in the middle of the auditorium. She carried a thick folder of student testimonials from her workshops, documenting the ripple effects of unchecked prejudice in schools. Richard Mitchell and Brandon sat near the front, their lawyer beside them, while local news cameras recorded everything. The meeting began with Richard Mitchell demanding the floor. "This whole situation has been blown out of proportion," he declared. "My son was expressing his opinion. This administration has created a climate of oversensitivity that's destroying our school's traditions." Before Michael could respond, Aaliyah stepped to the podium. The room fell silent. "I'd like to show you something," she said, plugging in her USB drive. The projector screen lit up with a series of images, students from different backgrounds studying together, the successful cultural awareness event, and finally, the hateful memes and messages from Brandon's campaign. "This isn't about sensitivity," she continued, her voice steady. "This is about respect and safety. When I was assaulted in class months ago, it wasn't just about hair. It was about power and prejudice. Now we're facing the same issue again, but this time we're ready." Jennifer stood up next, surprising everyone. "As someone who caused harm through my own prejudice, I need to speak." She turned to face Brandon and his father. "What you call jokes, what you dismiss as oversensitivity, these are the building blocks of discrimination. I know because I use the same excuses." Michael finally took the podium, placing both his resignation letter and his report on the table. "I have 2 options tonight," he announced. "I can resign and protect my career, or I can do what's right for our students. I choose the students." He opened his report and began reading documented incidents of harassment, including statements from students who had remained silent until now. The turning point came when Brandon's friends, unexpected allies, began standing up one by one. "I helped make those memes," one admitted. "I knew it was wrong, but I was afraid to say no." Others followed, describing the pressure they felt to participate in the harassment. Richard Mitchell's face reddened as more students spoke up. His lawyer whispered urgently in his ear, likely warning about potential liability. Brandon, seeing his friends turn against him, slumped in his seat. The board members exchanged glances as the evidence mounted. The board president finally spoke. In light of this testimony, we're implementing immediate changes. Mr. Thompson will retain his position. We're adopting a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination and harassment, including social media behavior. Additionally, we're expanding the cultural awareness program to all district schools. The aftermath was immediate and far-reaching. Brandon and several others received suspensions, with mandatory counseling and cultural sensitivity training. Richard Mitchell resigned from the school board, citing personal reasons. Most importantly, the school's atmosphere shifted decisively. Aaliyah stood in the empty auditorium after the meeting, exhausted but proud. Jennifer approached her cautiously. "You did what I should have done months ago," she said. "You stood up for what's right, no matter the cost." Michael joined them, placing a hand on his daughter's shoulder. The three stood in silence, understanding that while some wounds might never fully heal, the path forward was clearer than ever. The story of Riverside High would be shared at educational conferences and civil rights seminars, not just as a cautionary tale of discrimination, but as a testament to the power of standing up against prejudice, no matter how deeply entrenched it might be.